But sticking with players that we're talking about here, getting out of the draft, whether they're going to outperform or underperform their average draft position, I was hoping that you could identify some sleeper picks and some overdraft risks.
Well, I got a ton of sleepers because we just did this mock draft and I was amazed how many guys there are still available 125 and on. Just to name a few, Sam Bennett went at 163. He's a guy, if you're in a hits league, he gets a ton of hits. He gets, some shot volume. He used to be a pretty decent goal scorer when he first came over. Matt Barzell's going 164. Nick Suzuki at 150. Boone Jenner, he was unranked, and I have him as an extremely complete player. He was the 31st ranked player on my completeness ranking, so he does a little bit of everything. And I think Columbus is going to be a lot more improved than people think, just because of the fact that last year there wasn't a lot of chemistry in the top six. Laine was out for different stretches. Speaking of Laine, he's going at 157. So if you want a potential 40-plus goal scorer, you can get him that late. Philip Forsberg's going at 145 right now. Mark Scheifele, 144. Cole Caulfield, 143. These are all guys either point per game center in Scheifele, 50 goal potential in Caulfield. Forsberg, a couple years ago, the year that he went off, he was the number 4 ranked player on my rankings. He did everything, hitting, about a hit and a half per game, goal scoring, shot volume, power play, everything. And you can get these guys that late, almost, you're looking at probably the 14th round at that point in a 12-team league. You mentioned John Carlson. He's one of my sleeper picks. He's extremely underrated. He was the number 10 ranked player on my rankings in terms of completeness. He's going at 87. Carter Verhaeghe going at 85. You mentioned Chris Letang. He's going at 118 right now. Nick Ehlers at 161. Ooh. These are all guys I'd love to have on my team, and if I can get all of those guys late, it's almost like if it were possible in your draft, I'd trade a couple of mid-range draft picks for some more late-round picks just to get these guys, because they seem to be falling in the draft. In terms of overdraft risks, it's a little bit more complicated. You have to kind of factor in some stuff, and obviously name value is going to be part of that. I did a whole video on that, and there's a number of guys that statistically are overdraft risks because they put up an exceptional season last year, and maybe they can't really follow that up just based on the fact that it's just a regression thing. Maybe it's not a narrative thing, and I think that was the case in a lot of the guys that we covered in that video. But a couple of those guys, like Vince Dunn, is one of those guys that I think I had him last year. I loved having him, and he is a really good defenseman. But I mentioned in that video that Seattle was the number 2 ranked shot percentage team or shooting percentage team. If they regress the way that St. Louis did 2 years ago from the number 2 spot down to where they were last year, then they're going to score a lot fewer goals, and their power play wasn't particularly great either, even though Vince Dunn was quarterbacking it and he was good on the power play. I don't know how much they're going to be able to hold that value, especially they lost a couple guys. Sprong left. He was on PP2, so there's a number of different things that go into that. Jeff Skinner is a guy that I do like for his goal scoring and shot volume. Obviously, he's getting exposure to that top 6 in Buffalo, but he had a pretty significant deviation. There's a couple of other guys. Arturi Lehkonen and Val Nichushkin were 2 guys that were high on that list just because of how exceptional they were last year. For a stretch last year, Nichushkin was a top 5 player in fantasy, and then he got injured. And then Lehkonen filled that role on the power play. And obviously you're going to want exposure to Colorado players, but some of the just natural regression that would come from how good those guys were, I think you have to bake that in. And, I think the guys are baking that in. Lehkonen was, I think 130 or 140 in the ADPs this year, so they're already baking that in. And then the other guy that I wanted to mention was Brandon Montour, who I believe is going to start the season injured. He was exceptional last year. On my ratings, he was an 83, extremely complete, took over the power play 1 spot, and that is completely out of his depth in terms of what he's done in the past, and he's starting the season injured. So somebody else, maybe OEL, gets that power play time. If that works out, maybe he loses a little bit of power play time. Maybe he doesn't because he's so prolific in it, but there's a lot more risk involved in drafting Montour, and if he goes too high, then that could be a potential, situation where you overdraft the guy. But there's, that whole video is, I did a top 5, and then there's a bunch of honorable mentions in there. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, that video came out like a week or 2 ago. You can go find it on the channel.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about Brandon Montour in our draft, I don't think, because I'm fairly certain I'm going to keep him since I got him at, I think, in the 16th round of our 20-team league. So burning a 15th round pick to pick up Brandon Montour seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.